Welcome to the Pastured Pig Podcast, where we share the successes and challenges of raising pigs on pasture. We talk to producers all over the country, from small homesteads to large commercial pasture operations. Whether you're new to pastured pigs or have been raising hogs for decades, we hope you hear new ideas and new perspectives on pasturing hogs. Here's your host, Troy McClung.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Pastured Pig Podcast. It's good to be back, to have another episode out. A little bit more of a gap than I wanted, but we've been, I've been dealing with a little bit of medical issues, and I think we're getting those figured out now. So hopefully to get back on a regular schedule there. It was funny, the last podcast episode I did, I think we talked about processing our boar. We processed Napoleon here on the farm. First pig I'd processed here in a very, very long time, or maybe even the first one ever, because I've processed in other places. And then wouldn't you know it, just a month later, a friend of mine called and said, "Hey, will you help me process one of my gilts?" So we went over to his farm one day, and we did the initial process, the butcher, or actually the kill, the evisceration, the skinning, and then he has a cooler room in his garage, so we were able to hang it there, and he let it hang for quite a few days before he cut it up. So go from doing none on-farm processing to doing 2 within 30 days. So that was fun. Well, before we get into our discussion, I just wanted to talk real quick about our Facebook group. There's that delay again. The Pastured Pig Facebook group. It's growing. More and more you're joining. Good conversation going there. Just keep going. If you want to check it out, just go to Facebook and search The Pastured Pig. Also, we're getting closer to our Pastured Pig workshop down at Sheraton Park Farms in Grady, North Carolina. That's on May 22nd. And last time I talked to Chuck, I think there was a handful of slots left available. I think he's capping it at 50, and he's dangerous close to being there. So if you guys want to come down, hang out with us, talk pastured pigs for a day, then I'll post some information in the show notes there so you can check that out. One little thing that's not directly related to pastured pigs, well, I guess maybe it is. We just received our Starlink satellite internet connection, and we've had a deposit on that for 14 months. Finally got it. So we just got that installed and testing that right now to see how that's going to go. I am very optimistic so far, even with it just sitting on the ground, because we weren't sure we were going to mount it and had to special order a mount to put it on top of the house. But right now, with it just sitting in the grass, it is already light years ahead of the HughesNet. And we currently pay like $162 a month for HughesNet, and this is going to be $110. So, and of course, unlimited, no throttling for now. We'll see how that goes. But I think that could be a game changer for us. So it may allow me to do a little more episodes, maybe some live stuff, maybe even some multi-guest discussions going forward if the bandwidth can handle it. Also, one other thing is I've had 2 people now reach out and request more topical discussions. They appreciate the interviews we're doing with farmers and talking about their different setups with their pigs, but maybe trying to drill down deeper into topical stuff. So I've got 1 or 2 lined up already that will release soon, but would love to have more input from you guys to say, hey, what do we need to talk about specifically? Kind of like the Arco Lab discussion, people found that very helpful. So do we need to get more into the animal husbandry as far as treatment, disease, supplies, feed, the marketing side of it, all those type of things. So if you think about it, send me an email, troy@redtoolhouse.com, or use the contact form on thepasturedpig.com, and let me know what you think about that. All right. So for our interview this evening, we are going all the way up to Franconia, Minnesota, at Rust Hill Ranch, and we're going to talk with Matt Hardy. And I like Matt's approach. He kind of went in head first. He's kind of a self-proclaimed city guy that decided it was time to get up and get out because of all the unrest during COVID and some of the other things. And move to the country and get started. And it sounds like he's off on the right foot. So we're going to dive right into that, and we'll do some wrap-up stuff on the back end. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you for having me, Troy.
Well, all right. Well, okay. So Minnesota. For some reason on these podcasts, I always start with geography. I'm just fascinated by it, I guess. So, Franconia, Minnesota. I take it maybe it gets a little brisk up there at times.
It does. We actually had a heat wave, so it touched 40 degrees this week. But for about the past 3 weeks, it's been right at zero, give or take.
Oh, yeah. That'll keep you moving. So you've been chipping a lot of ice here recently, I would assume.
Well, yes, and we actually, we can get more into the details here. We're not running any animals in the winter,
okay.
Aside from a handful of laying hens from our first farming experiment that are still with us. But we processed all our pigs and all our broiler chickens by November.
Very good. Yes, there's a lot of wisdom in that. Absolutely. Well, all right. So tell me about. Let's start here. Let's start with Rust Hill Ranch, and I know we're going to get more into some of the history of kind of the background here. But give us that quick summary, that elevator speech, if you would, of Rust Hill Ranch, kind of where it is, what it's laid out like, and then how you guys came about it.
Great. So we're on 40 acres in Franconia, Minnesota, as you said. This is just on the eastern edge of Minnesota, along the St. Croix River Valley, along the border with Wisconsin. We raise forest-raised pork and pastured poultry. And last year was our first year, 2021, and we had a great year. We kind of dove in head first and figured some things out along the way, but all in all, things went better than I expected, and I was pretty optimistic and excited. It certainly wasn't easy, but it was a great year, and we're really looking forward to having one partial year under our belt.
Okay, so it's good. I appreciate that summary. That was nice and concise, so that allows me to ask you a couple more questions about that. So 40 acres right now. It's my understanding from pre-screening info that you don't necessarily own all that 40 acres. Is that correct?
That's right. We were living in the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area a couple years ago, and things got a little bit heated in that area, and we decided to head for the hills, so to speak, and started looking, like a lot of folks, at homestead options near in the same general region, but out in the outskirts of the city. And while we were looking, a friend of ours was able to actually acquire some land on an adjacent farm that farmer was selling and moving down to Florida. And so when he acquired some extra acreage and he knew we were kind of looking at doing some of this homesteading and livestock production, he asked if we wanted to kind of use that land that he acquired. And so we leased it from him last year, and we're in the process of formally acquiring it here this year.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so that entire 40 acres is lease. Am I understanding that, or is it partial lease, and then you guys have acquisition of some of that?
Well, we leased it all. Yeah, it's about 1/3 woods, 1/3 former corn and soy field that is now turning into pasture, and then 1/3 kind of riparian wetland. And so, just so that we could kind of express our intent to purchase the whole thing, we decided to lease the whole thing this year, even though we probably only utilized maybe 10 or 15 acres of productive capacity on that land.
Gotcha. Now, does this move from the metro area, does this require a total change of career? Is this abandon the 9 to 5, or is this you still have some of that going on and you commute or you telecommute? How do you manage that?
Yeah, my wife and I are lucky enough that we were able to participate in the remote economy, and so when things got shut down and everybody started living on Zoom, and I work in software, she works in counseling, and
Oh, yeah.
so we were able to do that over video and digital channels, and so really we could end up doing that from anywhere. So that gave us the flexibility to uh, pick up and find a new place to plant our roots, and uh, at the same time, that flexibility allowed us to interleave the farm chores and responsibilities and kind of the daily activities that go along with that. So we were juggling quite a bit last year, but it was worth it.
Wow. Yeah. I just think it's fascinating, and I love I love the irony of it when we think about homesteading and homesteading and small farming. Everyone kind of uses those words back and forth, or some feel they're different, some feel the same. But just this idea that a more traditional lifestyle can be realized thanks to technology. So
Right.
this technology that we've all been forced to embrace in the last 2 years is allowing more and more people. It just amazes me how many people that I talk to have a very similar story where they're able to flee the metro areas, the major urban areas, go to more rural setting, and of course all they really need is a good internet connection, and they can conduct a business just as if they were still driving into town 5 days a week.
Right.
Fascinating.
Right. I still commute about once a week, but and it's about an hour now.
Yeah.
But there were plenty days when that commute was an hour anyway in traffic and snow and stuff like that. So
Right, right.
it's
Yeah.
almost a wash.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, that's definitely great. So so here, I'm kind of teeing this up well because I know you've got a good story about history, but let's maybe start here, and then we'll almost do a flashback. We'll do the I'll do the old school flashback here. But so looking at the fact that you all were city dwellers, you mentioned heated, and I want you to unpack that a little bit. So things got a little hot in that area, and I can make some assumptions, but I'll let you say what was going on in that area there. But why is it that you came to the conclusion of, okay, we got to get out of the city because of these reasons? Let's go out in the middle of nowhere and let's do a pig and chicken farm.
Let's see if I can succinctly get from A to B there.
Yeah.
Um, so I think we, like a lot of folks, started pretty naively or simply when the lockdown occurred. Um, I think now jokingly referred to as 15 days to slow the spread. Uh,
Right. Yes.
that lasted a little longer, but anyway, and everybody sort of got the backyard chicken bug, and so did we. So we had our um, little house in town there in the suburb of Minneapolis, and decided, hey, let's get 6 laying hens and just give this a shot. And so I built a portable chicken coop out of actually a fence, a dilapidated fence that I finally tore down to appease the neighbors, and then repurposed the slats for this chicken coop, and thought I had a kind of a great little thing going back there. And um, we had the chicks in place and everything was moving along. And then let's just say the unrest,
Mm.
civil unrest in the heart of Minneapolis, which
Yeah.
was just maybe a 6, 8, 10 miles from our house and about 6, 8, 10 blocks from my office. Um, and we sort of had a reality check. And there's, without taking a particular stance on the topic, I went into the office the next day after some of the rioting took place there in Minneapolis, and I was literally driving through walls of flame as buildings were burning all around me. And
Yeah.
I I decided, okay, well, I've seen this with my own eyes, and this is not exactly the scene that I want to raise my kids in or raise a family in. And so we basically got um slapped in the face a little bit, and started to be able to say, okay, let's rethink where we want to be, what we want to do, and how we want to do it. And like we said, the virtualness of work at that time allowed us to expand our radius, while still staying, in the region, so that we could still enjoy the benefits of the resources of the city here, but um, let's just say keep our distance a little bit without abandoning the city entirely.
Yeah. Yeah. So since you'd already become chicken addicts, it just made sense as you moved out then you're going to just do what you're going to embrace chicken math and then just kind of grow into other areas. So
Right.
why did you decide to turn that into a business? I mean, what was the light bulb moment for there to go, okay, we've got our 6 chickens that we're allowed to have in town here. We move out rural. We take our 6 chickens with us. Chicken math happens. But what was the light bulb moment to say, okay, this needs to actually be something that becomes a business, becomes more than just a backyard flock?
Right, and I'm glad you reminded me the imprecision of my term homestead earlier. That was sort of our original idea, and then
Mhm.
it turned into the business side. Um, I think it came from uh, appreciating that. Well, I had been inspired by some of the, I guess, uh, godfathers of some of this stuff, like
Yeah.
Joel Salatin and
Mhm.
folks in that uh, genre who had a lot to share, and I'd been sort of a fan of for probably a decade
Yeah.
prior to any of this stuff going down. And
Very
so
good.
when I started thinking about, well, what's how could we, if we were decided to purchase 40 acres as a investment, if nothing else, what could we do with it? And pretty soon it's, the math just started looking better for trying to leverage some economies of scale and try to produce quantities that could potentially represent um, an income that we could live on if somewhat frugally. So, and I've been an entrepreneur, kind of accidental entrepreneur my whole life. Started my first company in my college dorm room in 1998, and um, had a couple others in between there. And so, in some ways, it was you know the just another stepping stone. I've had several uh, different career paths over that period, both in technology and in education. I was a classroom teacher for 8 years, and um, so in some ways it was a new adventure. And I had also been inspired and, I guess, informed by my wife and her family. She grew up on a farm in northeastern Montana. Her maiden name, last name, means Rust Hill in Norwegian, so we decided to name the enterprise after her because of that inspiration. Um, and I just got, not, hopefully not too naively, but just enamored with uh, that idyllic country, hardworking ethos. And Northeast Montana is a little bit different climate than eastern Minnesota, but
Right.
the concept is the same. And so once I started doing the math and saying, yeah, I think I could do that. I think I could do that. Let's find some animals and go for it.
Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing that because I just love to hear the genesis of an idea, but then also, pardon the pun, the organic nature of how
Mm,
people go from point A to point B. So this idea that if some of us listening may think, oh, here's a greenhorn that moved from the city out in the middle of nowhere, doesn't know what he's doing.
hmm
That like you'd mentioned, 10 years of following Salatin and some of those others, so that interest. B, the entrepreneurial spirit that you've had since college, and then of course C, the idea of moving out rural, and then C, these pieces kind of fall together. There's land, there's potential for this land. What can you do with 40 acres? Oh, here's some ideas. You just kind of you stick your toe in the water in some of these areas, but some of these areas have been building, culminating to this. And then of course D, which I want to talk about a little bit more, is the paying homage to the history of your wife's family's homestead and getting the inspiration from that. So unpack that
Right.
a little bit more. I know you got a little more details about this Eastern Montana homestead, and you guys have even traveled there recently, or even back to the original homestead, correct?
That's right. The farm that they continue to work, it's an organic wheat farm. My wife's grandfather was doing organic, kind of vertically integrated wheat production. Had a mill on site there, and bagged it up and sold it to local grocers before Bob's Red Mill. He was even was a household name. And they still farm it. And the original homestead that was uh, the land patent, I think is what they call it, according to my father-in-law, was issued in 1919, and that structure still stands. So we got a little photo of that on our website, and um, just that idea that there is so much history and legacy and continuity there. I just think is so special and so rare, and something that I wanted to and we wanted to honor in our own way, a couple states to the east.
Yeah, and I love that the inspiration that comes from looking back at that history, looking at that legacy, and just building on that tradition. So your wife, I mean, it's my understanding you're saying generations, literally, would you say 14 or 10 generations, something like that? That there's that many generations of farming.
Well, that site was homesteaded in 1919. That was the original homestead. And prior to that, they have it sounds like the original family photo in the U.S. was in the 1870s, Wisconsin, then through Iowa, and then northwestern Minnesota, Thief River Falls, and then they skipped over the Dakotas and landed in Montana.
Yeah.
And so the history does go even farther back. So we say fourth generation, just because that's sort of where the continuous farm has resided there.
Sure.
But it definitely, the farming was in the family pretty much from that original immigration.
Gotcha. Okay, excellent. So we've got the inspiration, we've got the kind of the unrest and the uncertainty of living in urban, the acquisition of this land at the lease level at this point. So you go out there and you decide, well, okay, the work allows us to still generate the income we're used to, but it's now time to get our hands dirty and get into this more. So where did you start? Was it the flock expansion? At what point did you say we need to have pigs on this property?
The flock expansion actually hasn't happened, so our chicken math has been pretty static.
Very good.
So we're taking care of them diligently here throughout the freezing cold here, but the interest in particular enterprises evolved. So I mentioned Joel Salatin. I was also getting really into some of the Greg Judy YouTube videos on his farm in Missouri with his grass-fed cattle. Gabe Brown from Bismarck, North Dakota is another big name that I don't know, maybe subconsciously I appreciated him because he says he was a city kid and his wife grew up on a farm, and I figured, well, if it's good enough for Gabe Brown, maybe I can pull this off too. So anyway, that was sort of Salatin is famous for chickens, and Judy and Brown are kind of famous for the cattle production. And then there's another, not to mention a competing podcast, although I think they've tailed off a little bit. There was one called Grass Fed Life where they Darby Simpson and Diego Footer talked about forest raised and pastured pork, and I was listening to dozens of these podcasts prior to the Pastured Pig podcast, which is now my favorite. And they made a comment about whether it's profitability or just kind of energy per animal unit or whatever. And you made a comment that speaking of animal math, one pig is worth about 80 chickens in terms of profit potential. And I heard that and I thought, oh, okay, well, I've got 6 chickens, so imagine 80 of these or one pig. And that's sort of that was the first kind of moment where I thought, oh, well, maybe I should do pigs first. Right. And then as I learned more about them, and I just sort of appreciated that, I guess they were a little bit more, I don't want to say niche, but a little bit more almost quirky of an animal to produce. That and of course, the famous Salatin line, the marvelous pigness of pigs, right? There's just something about them that people who work with them seem to love. And so I figured I'd give it a try. And the other thing I noticed is just a little bit of an aside, but as I was starting to build up some of my initial supplies, feeders and waterers and things like that, I was kind of running around Craigslist and farm auctions and stuff and acquiring just some very basic infrastructure to get things going. And I just sort of noticed accidentally or serendipitously that these people that raised pigs just seemed to be the nicest darn people I'd ever met in my life. And they're I don't know, there has to be something there. And I don't know if it's good people pick pigs or pigs only work with good people, but it seemed like it was as soon as I got into it, it just really just felt right.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting. I've never heard anybody discuss that, but that's good. It could be, you could be onto something there. That could be that pigs really choose us. We don't choose pigs, maybe.
Mm.
All right. So, man, yeah, I like what you said there about looking at this from a logical standpoint when it comes to business. And again, that speaks to your business acumen. I know that there's, and it's maybe not anything wrong with this. There's some people that choose pigs because they look good, or they're fun to play with, or
Right.
they like bacon so much they think, oh, let's have a business where I can have all the bacon in the world that I can eat. So looking at it and actually doing numbers and seeing how that pencils out is obviously, it kind of gets you ahead of the game there and looking at profitability of that. So deciding to go with pigs, and I know that last year was really your first year of going kind of cradle to grave with pigs. So tell me a little bit about that year. Like what did you start with, breeds you chose, and then we'll get on to talk about infrastructure.
So another this is probably debatable, so feel free to give your take on this. But another comment from that general pastured livestock podcast was that, when it comes to pork, once it's packaged and if it's raised on pasture, and particularly in the woods, it's so far and above what you might get in the grocery store that whether it was a fancy breed or not, people will be head over heels.
Yeah.
And so partly because it was so hard to come by feeder pigs last spring, and partly because I got over my, the potential arbitrary restrictions of saying, well, it has to be this breed or that breed. I just looked for folks that had feeder pigs available and started calling around. And the one I ended up going with had kind of just a traditional, or I should say, almost maybe more conventional Hampshire, Yorkshire, Tamworth cross. So they just had a bunch available, and they did their own thing on the farrowing side, and I got them when they were about 40 pounds, and so I had sort of a mixture out there in the pasture and in the woods, and it was interesting to see the different morphology of the different, even just those different breeds, without even some of the more interesting or savory heritage breeds.
Yeah, and I like that approach. Especially in the first year getting started there, it can almost become a little bit of a test or an experiment to say, okay, let's just take what we can get, because you can have preconceived notions, or you could even have this paralysis by analysis of saying, well, right, I got to have this breed. This is the breed that I've been studying on, or so and so says this, and then just get some pigs. I mean, that's kind of how I looked at it the first year. Is I'm going to put some pigs out here because I may not even be able to keep them alive. So let's just get some pigs that maybe have some hybrid vigor, can survive anything I throw at them, and then take it from there and kind of evolve as you see how the results come out. So yeah, I like that. So you've got these run of the mill, or no great personality pigs out there. They are what they are. And so how did you? Where did you start? Did you start with 2? Did you start with 30? Did you start with did you put them in a cage? Yeah. How did you know where to start there?
First was watching YouTube, like the way most people start anything these days, and sort of just seeing. I also knew, again, from this other from certain podcast advice, that they sort of said
you're fine with saying that. We have no such thing as competing podcasts. It's in fact, Darby's on my list. I'd love to have him on the show one of these days.
Oh, well, that's great. Yeah, and one of the things he said was, if you're thinking about, as you said, cradle to grave, just be careful about the cradle part, because that's an entirely different universe. And so I knew I didn't necessarily want to try to jump into this with some sort of farrowing situation or whatever. So step one was knowing I'm just going to find some 40-ish, 40, 50 pound feeder pigs, for whatever the going rate is, which this year was, somewhere between 75 and $100 a head, which apparently is higher than it has been in years past, but yeah, you gotta take what you get. And so uh, that was sort of my um, starting point. And then, I just frankly asked some humbling questions of of some of these breeders, like, so how do I get these home? uh,
Right.
I didn't have a stock trailer, didn't know if I needed one, and so I just started asking questions. That is one aspect of my personality. I'm not afraid to admit what I don't know, and so found a guy locally here, maybe 40 miles away, that just sort of let me talk his ear off about different things. And um, I had also I actually met a forest raised pork producer at the local farmers market in our old suburban farmers market where we lived. And I guess I made a mental note that if I ever took the leap here, I would reach out to them. So they are called Flying Leap Farm
Yeah.
in Taylor's Falls, Minnesota. I just sent her an email one day and said, I met you at the farmers market 2 years ago. Would you mind if I just came by and took a look at what you're doing with your pigs? And if there's anything I can do, you can put me to work. Please do. And so she gave me a tour and showed me just how they transported water, and had these, stainless steel feeders that they'd gotten from a production hog operation in Iowa, and just little things like this. Like, okay, I'll put those on my list. Um, and and then she also invited me to help install a fence, so I was able to come through on that offer to help, not just take the tour.
Yeah.
And so I realized, and she had made the comment, she liked doing groups of 7 because that was what she felt comfortable with, in terms of just how many animals underfoot. Um, and so I just ended up rounding up a little bit and just decided to do 10. I figured if I could do 7, I could do 10. And so we did 10 our first year. And the answer to how do I get these pigs home was get a couple extra large dog kennels from the local farm and fleet store, and put 5 in each one. And by the time you arrive back at the farm, they'll all be cuddled up in there, sound asleep. And sure enough, that's that's what they were. So the night before, as I was thinking about picking these things up and dropping them on, putting them in their training pen, which again, you asked about where I learned some of that, but I knew that I needed this, the hog panels, and I ended up doing a 32 foot by 32 foot training pen that I put them in, training for electric wire. And the night before I was picking them up, I just thought, what am I getting myself into? And but anyway, next day picked them up, and when I got back to the field there in the forest, and I saw they were all asleep on top of each other in the back of the pickup in these dog crates, and let them out down this, I sort of slid them out on a ramp and opened that gate, and they started rooting around in the forest floor, the happiest as could be. I went from what have I gotten myself into to this is the greatest idea I've ever had.
Yeah.
And it still almost almost makes tears come to my eyes just thinking about going from idea to animal in a few months, and the fact that it worked out so well.
That's great. And I got to say, you are extremely blessed that was your transport story, because and maybe mine's unique, but we did similar, because when we started 10 years ago, again, didn't know anything, but go transport 3 hogs and a dog kennel, but in the back of my wife's Xterra. And for some reason, I don't know why I didn't take the truck. I thought it may have been cold, and I thought the wind would be too much. But I guess we had Linda Blair pigs, because all they did was just spin around, squeal, and just projectile poop. So we drove. It was an hour drive, so we drove with the windows down when it was cold with our heads out, because the smell of pig manure was so strong. And I had to promise my wife I'd detail the car. But yeah. But I like what you said there, and I don't want to steal away from that. The idea that you get these pigs, you get them on the ground, and you just see them automatically just integrate into the setting you've put in place, and just how natural that seems, and then something clicks. So I would assume that if I polled you, that over the next couple weeks, you probably found yourself just fascinated sitting there watching them interact with the landscape you've introduced them to.
Absolutely, and I was probably a little bit overly nervous, so I had, multiple electric fences surrounding my hog panel training fence. I didn't want some coyote to get any ideas. And, um, I was down there, and actually at the time we had this land, but we hadn't actually acquired a home, um, in the area yet. So we talk about a sort of a leap of faith. We sold our house without a place, another home to purchase, and we ended up staying at basically a family cabin
Oh, wow. Yeah.
across the river in the woods for a few months while we looked for a new place. We were actually planning on building on this site, and that, like, probably no worse times to try to purchase lumber or steel than June of 2021. So we scrapped that plan and found a different little abode to acquire. But anyway, so that first week, basically it was an hour. Speaking of hour commutes, that was an hour. We were another hour out of the city, so I was commuting. An hour a day, or an hour each way, to take care of those animals. And so it was, and I look back and I think, wow, that was, 2 hours round trip every day just to water them and feed them and kind of watch them, like you said. But as I think back, something about that trip just didn't even matter, because I knew that I was going to be working with those animals, and it just seemed worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Very good. All right. So, so you've got him on the property there. Excuse me. You got him on the property there, and you're exploring, or you've got him in your training area. So you're looking at opening that area up. After they've gotten a little bigger, they've gotten trained to the electric fence. So what other infrastructure were you like, man, I got to go out and get this immediately, and I got to have this in place? And how did that just affect, maybe it just affect the wallet, or just affect your psyche as you're trying to put all that together?
Yeah, so I made sure that I had a list of things that I would need. Um, and I didn't necessarily obsess about buying everything that I would eventually need right away, but I made sure I had a 50-gallon waterer with a pig nipple on the front, and made sure I had a water tank that I actually had to transport water in. There's no electricity, no well on the property, so all the water was hauled. If I did use electricity, it was with a generator that I acquired a little bit later at a farm auction. So anyway, I kind of told myself, if I can pull this off with zero infrastructure, that everything I add into the mix later will feel like a true upgrade, and it'll feel like maybe I earned it. And so, like any Maslow's hierarchy of needs: food, water, shelter. So I was able to acquire a couple, I think they call them calf hutches. They're like a plastic igloo looking thing. I call them my pigloos. And I had those feeders, so I drove down to Iowa on Mother's Day. That didn't earn me a lot of points, but I drove down to Iowa on Mother's Day and threw 3 of these giant stainless steel feeders in the back of the pickup. And again, that was also kind of just a nice contrast, because I was just talking with that gentleman down there, and he was contracting, the raising of hogs in one of these giant 100,000 animal buildings down there, or complex of buildings, and just sort of seeing the contrast with told him what I had in mind, and he sort of just chuckled at the scale. Oh, 10, you're doing 10 pigs, huh? Interesting.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah, exactly.
We got a few more down here, but so we just talked about things, and not to get too morbid here, but just in terms of that contrast, him talking about what they did, again, back to COVID stuff and lockdown stuff, what they had, euthanizing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pigs in that area, just because of all the production, the processing chain breaking. And, just this idea that you don't really, like a lot of things, you don't really think about that when you're just staring at a nice vacuum pack in the grocery store when you're buying your bacon.
Yeah.
But the idea that we could do our own little small part to, not have any such contingencies that we had to worry about. We had our own share, but not necessarily anything on that scale. And so, not that not to make a judgment there, but just it felt good to think about that contrast and sort of embed some of our values into the meat we were raising.
Yeah, very good, very good. So you get all that in place, and looking at this first year, knowing that you've got 10 hogs, and obviously you're not gonna consume all 10 of those. So that business model you're building there, how did you go about acquiring a customer base, even for this small number? Where did you start there, and how did that work out for you?
So my background is in tech, and so I knew how to spin up a website pretty quickly. So I ended up just one weekend I said, we're sort of getting started. I'm starting to talk to different folks about what we're doing, including some bankers thinking about financing down the line for this and that, and this land acquisition. And everybody wants to see some sort of story somewhere of who we are. And so I put together our website in a weekend, and felt like it was pretty adequate, at least as a placeholder. And then we ended up using Squarespace, and so they had some built-in e-commerce stuff. So, candidly, I just looked around at what other kind of premium pastured pork folks were doing in terms of pricing. And sure, there's more sophisticated ways to do this, but I sort of picked a number that looked about right. I wasn't too concerned with whether it was 10% profit or 20% loss. The question was, could we actually sell it to someone?
Yeah.
And so could we put together an ordering system that made it easy for people to sort of claim theirs and get on the list, and just make sure that was easy to manage. So some of it was friends and family, word of mouth, that kind of thing. We have had our share of folks that have found us more organically with the Google search. They just we show up on the list, and they'll place an order. But that first year, especially because there were so few animals to go around, a lot of them got snatched up by friends and family first.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It definitely was COVID. That's one thing it brought, was a demand for that, and it seemed like anybody that had a surplus of inventory was able to move that much quicker than they had expected.
Right.
Well, excellent. So, yeah, looking at your website, you've got online sales here as an aspect of that. I like how you're doing the bundles, and it kind of keeps that simple, offering your chicken there, deposits as you assume head into this next year, and kind of getting that interest generated immediately. So, how did it go to this final, or this? Because obviously your pigs have been processed. You're not raising any pigs right now because of the winter season. But how did that go to finishing there? Any issues? Any things that maybe you've learned from this first year that say, okay, this is what I need to do better next?
Yes. So one goal I had was to, everybody's favorite topic is how hard it is to find processing dates, and so I felt that pain as I was trying to find an open slot later than everybody else. So we actually didn't finish until November, or didn't find an opening until November. Got the pigs a little bit late. It was June 2nd. So basically Thanksgiving was the last one we butchered. At any rate, and so one thing I learned was, if you use a flat price because it's a nice round number and it looks about right, and you're not sure how big your pigs are going to be, and then you grow them for a month longer than you should, you just spend a lot of feed adding weight to these pigs that you didn't necessarily need to for the price you set. Right. So to be specific, we were expecting or hoping that they would finish around 285 live weight, and they ended up finishing closer to 350. Oh, wow. So I think people were happy that they got a nice big nice bonus, although some of them, if you don't have the freezer space, I'm not sure that's actually a gift. I think half of my customers and friends and family that decided to purchase from us ended up purchasing a deep freezer as well. So I actually consider that the gift that keeps on giving, the fact that I inspired them to get one of those. So, right. But yeah, it takes up a little bit of room. And so that was one thing I learned. Don't necessarily grow them past the point that you want to sell them for. although the processors were happy to do it because they process, by the pound. Um, and then I also wanted to. I'm a hunter as well, so I've done dozens of deer and hundreds of ducks in my life, right? So the big game and the poultry aren't necessarily intimidating. The fowl poultry aren't necessarily intimidating. But so I ended up doing the pig that we saved back for ourselves. I ended up butchering that myself on farm.
Good deal.
And so that was different than different from a deer, but not wildly so.
Yeah.
And I'm also used to, not to get too in the weeds on that, but I'm used to kind of separating. I think they call them now. The trendy term is it whole cuts or primal cuts or muscle, whole muscle, separated at the sort of the natural seams versus the kind of the bandsaw method.
Right.
And
yeah.
that was maybe one difference, is all the butchering tutorials talk about, just cutting everything down straight lines and not really following some of those curves and those things like that. So that was a little bit different. And had a friend who also wanted to butcher his own on farm together, so I helped him do that. I also had one person come and purchase an animal live for his own butchering back on his property. So we, again, not to get too morbid here, but I ended up dispatching 3 of the 10 myself.
Yeah.
And I guess I didn't know how that would feel after 6 months of raising these things up, but honestly, it felt about as respectful as I could be to give them a really good life and have them expire there on the ground that they were, grew up on. Not to say that the ones that got transported to the processor had any, major worse experience, but it definitely did not feel gruesome or hard to do. It felt like a respectful way to close the loop.
Yeah. I was going to say that there's just a natural closure to that when you can be there at the beginning and also be there and have your hands in the end. It just seems to be today. I same way. I've got one pig that when it's time for, she's kind of become the matriarch of the farm, and when it comes time for her to go, I mean, she's way past processing, but when she gets to the point where she probably needs to be put down because of just age, then I'm the only person that needs to do that because it's my responsibility. And she's been a part of the farm since almost the beginning. She's the second generation of pigs on our farm, but it's just one of those things. It's like it feels like that's what I owe it to her to do that and respect to the pig. So
right.
So let's talk about next year. So what does 2022? Obviously, we're coming out of winter. Well, you're probably not coming out of winter yet, but we're coming out of winter soon. Hopefully, we'll be coming out of winter soon. So you're coming out of winter soon. I assume you're going to do pigs again. I know you do some poultry as well. So what does 2022 look like for Rust Hill Ranch?
Yes, last year we did 10 pigs and 150 chickens, broiler chickens. This year we plan to do 20 pigs and 450 chickens. So just call it doubling. Part of that is just to utilize the capacity of the land a little bit better. We had a method of moving the pigs where they were on basically one side of the property has woods, and then there's pretty much a straight line that separates those woods from the pasture. And so we ran our portable temporary polywire fence perpendicular to that, so their paddocks were half woods, half pasture. So they could come in and out, and so that worked well. And then we just marched up the length of the 40 there. Luckily, we started at one end, and when it was time to be finished, they were at the other end, and we didn't run out of woods. So those were about quarter to half acre paddocks. We left them in there about 7 to 14 days at most. Anyway, so we felt like we had some. We were really only using maybe half or a third of the available land there. So by doubling, I think we can use that a little more effectively. I don't know if you have an opinion on if 20 pigs in one group is too much, or if if that would be fine if they've got enough space to spread out.
Yeah, to me that's just kind of seeing how they behave. Obviously, the more pigs in the same amount of pasture, you just move them faster, or you double the amount of space. If your 10 pigs last year did well at a certain ratio of ground and the days they spent, then and you didn't have to do a lot of ground repairs, they moved. Then just look at expanding that to whatever degree based on the next number that you have. And that's the neat thing, especially with the, like you'd said, the infrastructure you put in place, not putting in permanent infrastructure yet, with the portable, with the poly fence, and of course having the beauty of being mostly flat and wooded on one side and pasture on the other. You can really do a lot of experimenting and really just, it's one of those things, just take copious notes to say, hey, this is working out this way. Our pastures are improving from last year, or they're declining. We have to do a lot of overseeding. Well, we're putting too much wear and tear on them. Yeah, I think I don't know that there's a smoking gun to say this is exactly how many you want to do this long, because there's so many variables. I mean, you guys could experience a drought, or you could experience a deluge this year, and then
right
between mud and dried grass, hopefully there's a happy medium in between that allows you to be productive.
Yeah, last year was really hot and dry. The woods were about, when I walk in there, I felt like it was about 15 to 20 degrees cooler under there. So I think that helped a lot. And I think it being a little drier helped to, ward off what other kinds of, possibly some potential diseases and stuff that happen when things get cold and wet. So felt pretty good about last year. We also put down a forage cover crop for them. It's kind of a special mix designed just for, at least marketed as for hog, specially built for hogs. So got some really nice kind of leafy cabbage stuff in there that they just loved. In fact, it was so good I'd eat a little leaf every time I went in there. So that seemed like a pretty good setup.
Yeah, and then the thing that we've discovered, and it sounds like you probably have an opportunity for this as well, is when there's good mass production. So this year we just had an incredible crop of acorns and hickories and walnuts and beech nuts. And it just seemed like there were times where I daily feed the pigs, so I have a daily ration that I would take them that was soaked and fermented. So as I would take it to my herd that I was processing this year, I would put it out, and there'd be times to see, okay, certain days that they're kind of going at it, and the other days they're kind of just sauntering up to it, and it's like, there's obviously they're finding plenty of forage in this woods, and then realize it's connected to mass. So even those things can be huge variables to say, hey, my feed conversion just looks incredible when I pencil this out this year, and then next year it's just not as good. But it's again those variables that come with pasturing that give you that option.
Yeah, and we have some really, that was actually one thing I was a little bit concerned about. We have some really big, like 300-year-old oak trees in there. And I was a little nervous that they might get too enthusiastic about finding those acorns and might actually do a little damage to the root structure if there's too many simultaneously, even if you keep them moving quickly. So I guess we'll keep an eye on that this year.
Yeah, I would say, again, just in my experience, especially, I do have to deal with the heavy slope and erosion, so that's something I'm constantly watching. But with the oaks that we have, or any of the trees for that matter, that they just don't seem to be able or are interested in digging up too much. It literally is, we're going to go with the ground contact, we're going to get what's there, and then eat and move on. The thing I've noticed the most is using certain trees, especially our shagbark hickories, where they're extra spiky. They like to rub up against them. And so walking through the woodlot there, I see some of my shagbarks and some of the white oaks are a little smoother around the waist than they should be. But they're not peeling the bark or doing anything like that. I think only if a pig is really starving is it going to start trying to delaminate the roots and dig everything up that way.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, starving was not their problem last year. They were right. They performed very well.
Yes, indeed. So we've talked about 2022. What about longer term plans? So what do you think? Maybe let's look down the corridor of time here at 5 years from now. What would you like to see? What would be a goal for Rust Hill Ranch within 5 years?
Well, 5 years, I definitely want to be lugging fewer 5-gallon pails full of water.
Right.
I don't know how many thousand of those I did this summer, but I guess it was a good workout. Um, so, there's an infrastructure component there. I do like the idea of, I think there's a permaculture concept that sort of says just don't do anything with the land for a year, just watch it.
Yep.
And I sort of did that out of necessity last year. Was not investing in underground water lines and below the frost line 50 inches down, and bunch of permanent fence. We did string a little bit of high tensile just to have a hot wire that we could tap into, but
Sure.
um, otherwise it was really really low key. So increase in the infrastructure, a well on site would obviously be pretty great. Maybe someday we'll actually build that dream homestead we planned on doing in 2021 before 2021 does. And so that's, even though we live about 10 minutes up the road now from this land, and so that's not a long way, but yeah, I know there's obvious advantages to having stuff out your back door. So that's another component. I think we also would like to kind of get back to that original inspiration of having some cattle on there to actually convert grass into meat. Doesn't necessarily need the same kinds of omnivorous ration that pigs do. So I think there's a little bit more using what nature gives you right on the spot there, and that once the pasture's been a little more rehabilitated from the corn and soy rotation, that's another piece.
Yeah. Good deal. Yeah, I like that. I like the idea of investing in infrastructure, but really sitting back and observing the land and seeing what it's going to do. And I can speak from experience. There's things that I put in that were like, okay, this is going to be permanent, and then realize, well, that's just not that's not the best way to do that. So, the money and time and tearing something out and replacing it simply because I felt it was a better plan. But yeah, that's the challenges of it. You read the land and just see how it goes and adjust the best you can. Well, all right, so let's do this. Before I let you go, I know we're running a little long here. Before I let you go, I got to ask you the question I asked everybody else. So, Matt, what is your favorite part, or what do you like the most about raising pigs on pasture?
Well, since it was my first year, it was the continuation of that story I kind of already hinted at, where I had no idea about what pigs would be like to work with. I've listened to enough podcasts of yours to know that everybody has basically the same answer, which is pigs are just wonderful creatures to work with. But that sort of very specific, an animal that will, you hear horror stories and about, how hard they are to load and how frustrating they are to work with, and to get them all, transported 30 minutes down the road and they've all fallen asleep on each other, and then they're at home in heaven as, within a tenth of a second of hitting that dirt. That to me is a moment that I will always cherish. And the fact that they got bigger and they got a little bit more brutish, but they didn't ever really get any more unpleasant to work with. They were, if they were moving one way and I was moving another, it was a little harder to kind of nudge them out of the way. But that was another thing I just learned. I guess it was a good just attitude to have in general about some things, which if something doesn't want to do what you want it to do, don't try to force it, because you're just going to make it worse.
Right.
And so I found that instead of trying to chase a pig around, if 9 got through the gate on our paddock move and 1 was still hanging out, wasn't chasing it, wasn't whacking it with a stick. I was sort of proud that I never once kicked or yelled at these things. I would just sort of wait and I'd walk behind them. And if they wanted to stay away from me, I would use that to my advantage and get on the opposite side that I wanted them to go. And then they'd stay away from me and go where I wanted them to go.
Yeah.
And eventually got to the point where, open the gate and say my little chant, and here they come charging at me, without a thought, from them or me on what we were doing. So that to me was kind of the culmination of that very first moment I had them out there, and they were just a joy to work with from start to finish.
Good deal. Very good. Awesome. Yeah, I got to say, it does become, like you said, the pat answer, but there is just something about watching them on pasture, and then of course just the added it forces you to, and my wife could attest to this. I originally not a patient man, probably even could say I have a little bit of an anger issue in my past, but it seems like pig farming has caused me to calm down, along with other things, but it seems to have added to that healing salve of becoming more of a patient individual, simply because you see that when a pig appreciates you and respects you and is not completely scared of you, they're actually a little bit more easy to manage and to handle than something that's afraid you're like the alpha predator. You want to come in and kill them, so they're defensive or running away or doing those things. So it is neat. And you made me think for some reason when you were talking to this story, this memory popped in my head of when we had to bottle feed a couple piglets when we had a bad farrowing. Had actually the sow died, and these 3 survived, and so we bottle fed them, and I just felt I was just so attached to these piglets that I once they were weaned, I sent them to another farm, actually another location that knowing that I wouldn't be the one necessarily processing them. And I actually visited that farm when it was when they were much grown. Probably been 4 months, 5 months later, and visited that farm, and both of those piglets came running up to me. Of course, they weren't piglets at that time. Wow. Came running up to me and just rub against you like dogs, and it's just like, man, that's just amazing. These animals can remember that, and that fear of man is gone, and they just didn't have that relationship with the guys that tended them daily. But once they saw me, I don't know if it was a smell or a sight or what, but they just I guess they were reminiscing the way I was. So it was interesting. Very cool. Well, Matt, if people want to find out more about Rust Hill Ranch, how can they do so?
Our website is rusthill.com. We're on Instagram at Rust Hill Ranch. Those are the best places to find us. Mm-hmm. And the photos right now are dominated by pictures of snow. Unfortunately, it's not quite as interesting as good-looking pigs and chickens. But we're excited for spring to be sprung here and get some new faces out there.
Yeah, very good. I notice you do have a YouTube link on your website as well. Is that something that's coming?
That's something I just wanted to get a little kernel of a start on. I think we just have a handful of videos there now. Gotcha. One of them is actually my son, at the time 2-year-old son, helping me set up this training pen, and so that's been another real blessing, is just to have my young, in this case, son, and now I have a 1-year-old daughter who I'm sure will be doing her share soon. But just the ability for them to participate in this, I hope that someday they whether they know it or not, that they appreciate that we're trying to do this and that they got to be a part of it.
Yeah, very cool. Yep. Again, speaking from some experience there, where 10 years have passed, and I have a 20-year-old son and a 16-year-old son, and the experiences they got to have. They wouldn't say they were all great, but they at least appreciate it and realize that they've gotten to experience something that most teenagers their age would not normally experience. So I think they chalk that up as a positive. So, well, all right, Matt, man, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. Enjoyed speaking with you, and we'll definitely post I'll post these links down in our show notes there, so you guys can check out his website, and he's got a blog element on there as well, so you can kind of see what he's got going on. Some great pictures as well. Well, Matt, I'm going to let you go, but I appreciate you coming on, and man, I pray you have a great week. All right, well, I really appreciate Matt coming on the podcast and sharing his story with us. I just love the startup stories, kind of like time for a change of scenery, change of plan, change of direction, and just dive in head first. So I appreciate him sharing that. Well, I'd be remiss if I wouldn't, again, give a shout out to our Patreon supporters. I really appreciate those of y'all that have stuck in here with me, even this winter and early spring, where podcast episodes aren't rolling out as fast as I'd like them to. But I think that may change going forward. But if you would like to can help continue to support the podcast, or see the podcast and the other things that we're trying to do grow more, then by all means consider supporting us at Patreon for as little as $5 a month. You can help us, and we're trying to reach a supporter level goal of 40 as our next benchmark, and be able to kind of turn on some additional features as well. So check that out. There'll be details down below in the show notes. Well, again, I appreciate everyone that listens, the feedback. You know how to reach out to me using the form on the website or use my email, troy@redtoolhouse.com. And just give me feedback. If you want to be on the podcast, let me know. Or if you've got some great topics, let me know. Well, I pray everyone a great week. Take care.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of the Pastured Pig Podcast. To learn more about our podcast or to submit topics or recommend guests for future episodes, visit redtoolhouse.com.